Hello, I'm John Sotek from Census. Census is a leading clean technology solution company offering smart meters, communication systems, software, and services to the electric, gas, and water utilities. Census is proud to partner with FMEA and bring you the following encore presentation from the 2014 annual conference.
Our final speaker today is former United States Senator George LeMieux. Senator LeMieux is currently chairman of the board of the Gunster law firm, focusing his practice on resolving business disputes and advising CEOs and prominent individuals on business, law, and politics from a state and national perspective. Senator LeMieux served as Florida's 34th United States Senator in the 111th Congress. While in the Senate, he served on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Special Committee on Aging. Previously, he served as Florida's Deputy Attorney General and later as Chief of Staff to then Republican Governor Charlie Crist before being appointed to the United States Senate. Senator LeMieux is here to provide us with an insider's view of Florida politics and give us his outlook on the future of Florida's business climate. So please join me in welcoming Senator LeMieux.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I understand that I'm the only thing between you and your break for the rest of the day, so I will keep my comments as short as I can. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak with you here today. What I want to do first is to talk a little bit about what's going on in Florida, because the economic situation in Florida is not only of interest to all of us, but it also will affect what's happening in this current election, as what's happening in this current election will probably impact our future economic picture. So let me widen the lens a little bit and talk to you about the history of our economy here in Florida and what's going on right now. So we all know that we just got through the worst recession in 70 years in Florida. Folks called it the Great Recession. We lost more than 700,000 jobs in Florida. Some estimates have it almost as much as 1 million jobs. For the average working family in Florida, pretty devastating time. Houses underwater, short sales on foreclosures, and most likely either mom or dad losing their job or not having enough of a job. So a very challenging time in Florida. The good news is that we're through that. We've earned back about 600,000 jobs, which puts us at the pre-recession level. That doesn't mesh with 715,000, but that's because more folks have come to the state in that time. Great fundamentals in Florida that have helped us do well in the past, which continue to help us and make us attractive compared to other states in the country. No state income tax is a huge benefit. Low regulation, a good business climate. It's a right-to-work state, which means it's not a union state. And a gateway to Latin America, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes. The Panama Canal expansion is having a fundamental impact on Florida, specifically Southeast Florida, Miami-Dade County, with the building of warehouses and other logistics spaces in order to accommodate these large ships that will now be able to come through the Panama Canal. What happens now is that the super ships, the really big container ships from Asia stop in California at Long Beach or Los Angeles, and those containers go off those ships onto trains or trucks across the United States to deliver those goods as far as east as New England. After the Panama Canal is expanded to be able to accommodate those large ships, those containers are going to be dropped off on the eastern seaboard of the United States because it's always cheaper to ship on water than over land. And the longer they can stay on the water, the less expensive it is for those folks who are bringing those goods to this country. So you'll see a lot of those containers hopefully stop in the Port of Miami, Port Everglades and Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville's port, and then they'll continue to make their way up the eastern seaboard. That's creating a lot of demand for industrial space in Miami-Dade County and in Broward. This year we will have close to 100 million visitors, which is a staggering number of people. If you think about it, we have close to 20 million residents. 5 times that many people come to the state every year to visit us. We get to live in a place where other people save all year to come on vacation. And that is something that has allowed Florida not to have a state income tax. If we didn't have that tourist population who was paying our sales tax while they were here, we wouldn't have the funds that we would need in order to support the state. So right now you don't see a lot of tourists on the road, but when you're back where you live in November, December, January, and February, and somebody's on the highway driving 30 miles an hour ahead of you, looking lost with their hazard lights on, don't honk at them. Wave at them, smile, give them directions because they're paying your taxes. 19.2 million residents, net growth now of 300,000 a year. That's not as robust as it was pre-recession, but it's getting to a good clip. The estimate is that we will have 25 million people in Florida over the next 20 years if that arc of growth continues. That's something for all of us to think about in terms of what you're doing by providing affordable and reliable energy to folks. The ability to continue to do so as that many more new people come here. They're going to come from a variety of ways, but primarily two sources. They're going to come from folks who are retiring to Florida. Once people can sell their house in Rochester and Buffalo and Cleveland, no offense to LeBron James, they're going to move to Florida. They're going to either move to Florida or Arizona. Those are the two warm weather climate destination states that folks are moving to. And now with the economy getting better, they can sell their houses up north and they can't afford to move to Florida. The second way people are coming to Florida is foreign migration, and that's primarily through Latin America, but it's also Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, and other places where people are finding their home in Florida. Obviously, growth in Florida is going to require affordable and reliable energy. It's a driver of economic development. You know that. It's a cost of doing business, and if it's a low cost and it's reliable, it's a positive in Florida's favor. We have a diverse system, as you know, of municipal and investor-owned utilities, and to me that's a strength to have that diversity. Policy makers are going to have to focus on infrastructure to ensure affordability and reliability. As we add those 5 million more people, where is that power going to come from? On the water side, where is the water going to be? You're going to see the state legislature over the next few years really focus on water to try to figure out how we're going to provide water for those 5 million new people and the businesses that will come with them. Natural gas is a game changer in your industry. The ability for the United States to be able to produce and supply cheap and affordable natural gas is changing the economy of this country. It is making manufacturing more competitive than it was in the past with places like China because of that cheap source of energy. And it's going to continue to reformulate the way that you all generate electricity as more plants will switch over to natural gas as the source supply for those power plants. Congratulations, by the way. I saw in a report that was on your website that your ability to provide quicker repairs, shorter outages, and fewer interruptions than your competitors in the industry. So you've been doing that for years. Congratulations on that success. What are the economic drivers in Florida? What makes our economy work? Well, traditionally, they've been few, but they've been significant. Obviously, real estate and construction, as people have moved to Florida since really after World War II. Those have been huge industries. Tourism is a huge industry. If you are from Jacksonville or Pensacola or Panama City or Tampa Bay, you know that the military is a big deal in this state as an economic driver. 23 military installations in Florida. Eggland in the Panhandle is the world's largest Air Force base. Mayport in Jacksonville is the second largest naval base on the eastern seaport. These military functions generate billions of dollars of economic impact. It's not just the men and women who are serving there, it's the surrounding defense industry businesses that are really critical in Florida that provide a lot of jobs and a lot of spin-off job opportunities. Agriculture, always a stable component of our economy, but not as big of a factor as it used to be. What are the modern drivers that are helping diversify Florida's economy? Healthcare and life sciences. Arguably, healthcare is the biggest business in Florida, and as more retirees move to Florida, more people will need those health services. You will also see Florida, if Florida does what it should do, become a healthcare destination. If you're already coming here for vacation, there's no reason you also can't come here for healthcare. So look in future years for the state to promote Florida as a destination for wealthy individuals in Latin America, primarily, to come here and to get their health care. They already have an experience of being in Florida. Many of them already have a condominium and a bank account in Florida, it makes sense that they could get that health care here too. Trade, transportation, and logistics. I mentioned the Panama Canal expansion. We are becoming a trade and logistics center. We are a big trade business throughout the country and throughout the world. Financial services, which I'll talk about in a moment. Financial services becoming a big part of our economic landscape, especially in Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. And that encompasses private equity and hedge funds. And I'll talk to you about their move here from Connecticut and New York. Healthcare and life sciences is if you have not been to the medical city in Orlando at Lake Nona, you really should see it. It's a prototype of what Florida can be, and something I think that is very exciting. A lot of this has to do with the good efforts that Governor Bush had to bring the Sanford Burnham Institute, which is a biomedical research facility, to Orlando. We also have Scripps, which came to Palm Beach County, and others around the state. But what's happened in Orlando is they've really capitalized on that brain power, and they've built the continuum of healthcare around that research. So not only do you have that fantastic research going on, you have hospitals there. You have the Nemours Children's Hospital there. You have the Orlando has built the VA facility there for the Orlando VA. You have the medical college from University of Central Florida there, as well as University of Florida has a facility. So you're going to have folks collaborating, not only who are delivering healthcare services, your doctors and your nurses, but also the people who are doing research. And that is the kind of intellectual capital that Florida needs. We need more intellectually challenging jobs, jobs that pay folks not necessarily for the sweat of their brow, but for the quality of their intellect. Those jobs are transformative in Florida, and frankly, we haven't had enough of those jobs. So that when we had our recessions in Florida, like the last one, because we had too few drivers in our economy, we were disproportionately hurt. If we diversify the economy, and especially bring these knowledge-based jobs here, we're going to be more resilient the next time there's a recession. Some of the other life sciences facilities, the top left is Scripps. You also have here on Lake Nona, you have the Torrey Pines, and you have University of Miami's tech transfer facility. If you are driving into Miami on I-95, instead of looking to the east and seeing the downtown, you look to the right, you see the Jackson Hospital corridor. Right next to that is the picture on the bottom right, which is their new tech transfer facility, where they're trying to commercialize their scientific research and development. Not pictured here is the University of Florida, which has done a tremendous job of taking the commercial application of their research and turning it into products and jobs in the Gainesville area. So this is a big part of where Florida is going and where Florida needs to go. I mentioned financial services. If you are working at a financial services firm in Manhattan, you are paying $14 plus more out of every $100 you make in taxes. So that is an attractive portion for Florida, a driver for Florida to bring folks here. And now with technology, all of the things that I could have done from my trading desk in Manhattan or in Greenwich, Connecticut, I can now do in Florida. And most of the folks who are running these hedge funds and private equity firms have already had a place in South Florida to start with, in Palm Beach or in Coral Gables or other parts. So they're familiar with South Florida. So we've seen 77, I believe it is, hedge funds. Now that number's a little old. Private equity and hedge funds come back to South Florida, move here. Miami is now the second largest banking area, and they count all of Southeast Florida in the Miami region, behind New York City. So this is another area of intellectual capital, of a new part of our economy that's very exciting. We even have California companies relocating to Florida for the first time. And that's also obviously a high tax, high regulation state. In the past, those companies have gone to Colorado and Texas and other places. Now we're seeing Californians moving their hedge funds here, moving their dietary and nutraceutical businesses here. That's the STEM tech folks. First Republic Bank, interestingly, is a private wealth bank, a bank that caters to the rich, and they have seen their clients move out of the San Francisco Bay Area to Palm Beach, so they have followed them and they've opened up in Palm Beach a branch to service those clients. These are all positive indicators for Florida. Trade, transportation, and logistics, 17% of our economy, 60,000 businesses in Florida in the import-export business, 162 billion in imports and exports annually. It makes us sixth in the country. Watch for us to climb higher than that being the third biggest state, there's no reason why we shouldn't be the third biggest in trade. And with this Panama Canal expansion, it's going to facilitate that. Not surprisingly, Latin America is the principal trading partners that we have, Brazil being the largest, but we trade with folks all over the world. And you've seen the governor take numerous trade missions. You see mayors of places like Miami and Tampa and Orlando go on trade missions. That makes a lot of sense. By the way, companies that had an international business component during the recession here in Florida did a lot better than those that didn't. It's another diversification so that if the economy goes bad, you're protected because you have another stream of revenue. This is going to be hard probably to read from the back, but it's a more indication of what's happening. And this is a chart that shows where Americans are moving to, and it's per capita. So you see Florida and Texas at around the 5 number, 5.5 for Texas, Florida's 5.3. That is based upon how many people we already have. So that's the increase based upon our current population, and that's why North Dakota is so high, because nobody lives in North Dakota. So when you bring so many new people there, that number goes up disproportionately. But the states that people are moving to are the low tax, low regulation states, and they're in the South and they're in the West. North Dakota, obviously, is because of the natural gas exploration. That's really almost like 1849 in California now. It's really a gold rush out there. So of the big states that you see people moving to, Florida and Texas really attracting the most of that population. This to me is a staggering statistic, and what this chart shows is people who are foreign nationals buying real estate in this country, where are they buying the property? 23% of their purchases are in Florida. So just think about that for a second. There's 50 states. It's a big country, but 1 out of 4 of the purchases are in the Sunshine State. That's more than California, which comes in second, and California is twice the size and twice the population of Florida. So we are very fortunate to be situate where we are. Florida really is the gateway to the Southern Hemisphere, and I'm going to talk about Miami in a second and what's happening in Miami. So in 2009, the recession was so bad in Miami that we had 10,000 plus empty condominium units. If you were in Miami in 2006, 2007, 2008, you saw building crane after building crane constructing these large condominiums in downtown Miami. And it was a bubble, and the bubble burst, and things were so bad that the estimate was in 2009 that it would take at least 10 years for Miami to absorb all of these condominium units. The Wall Street Journal had articles showing college students and law students living in these palatial, marbled condos because the owners were just trying to do anything to generate some rent to help them get by. Tremendous amount of foreclosures and all of that. Well, something happened at that same time. At that same time, Latin America wasn't in recession, and the Brazilian economy especially was extremely strong. The Brazilian stock market in the same period of time increased 100%, and their currency increased 100% on the dollar. So their real against the dollar doubled in value. So you're a wealthy Brazilian who's spent time in Miami already, and now the $1 million condo that you want to purchase is 50% off because of our recession, and your money's worth twice as much. So the equivalent was it cost now about $250,000 for them to buy that $1 million condo. And they did. And about a year and a half ago, every one of those 10,000 or so condominium units was sold. And I think really in some ways the recession accelerated Miami. We've all been hoping and wanting Miami to be the gateway to Latin America, for Miami to be a first-tier international city, to have a strong economy and a strong attraction. And that has now happened. Something magical happened with this recession. Miami has become accelerated. By the way, if you go to downtown Miami now, you'll see more building cranes than you did even during the boom prior to the recession. We just moved to the 600 Brickell building for our Gunster's Miami office, and behind us, they're building such a large commerce center that is the largest construction project in a city in America. There's 13 cranes working on, I think, 7 buildings that are going to be part of this new Brickell Center. And the estimate is that there will be 175 new buildings, high-rise buildings built between Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade County in the next 10 years. It is an amazing time. Miami has grown up. It is no longer just a place that you saw when you watched Friday night television and they were showing, you know, those police detectives. Miami now is a place that is internationally known for not just fun, but for business. And it's creating a huge boom. So right next to where we moved our firm on 600 Brickell is the 700 Brickell space, where they're going to tear down a perfectly fine office building in order to build an 80-story office building. An 80-story office building. It will be the biggest building south of Manhattan. And there's talks of building a second 80-story office building. On the way over here, I was reading about the last parcel in downtown Miami that's on the water that is just about an acre in size, which is enough of a footprint to build one of these big condominiums. And that sold today for $125 million for just the dirt. So it is a transformative time. As expensive as it is becoming, it is the most affordable of these gateway cities in the world. And what do I mean by gateway? Gateway means it is a city that is safe and secure, that is on the border between a place that is not. So if you are a Venezuelan and you're ready for Maduro, the puppet dictator down there, to come take your company and throw your family in jail, you have to have a place where you can put your money and your children and your family that's secure. And that's what Miami is. Same thing in Argentina, where they're nationalizing businesses. Same thing in other parts of Latin America. There's just not the safety and security that the United States offers. There are other places around the world that are like that. London is like that for the Middle East. Vienna, Austria is like that for Eastern Europe. Vancouver and San Francisco and Seattle are like that for China. And Miami has become that, and Miami is the cheapest of those cities. So for the globe-trotting set who need to have a safe and secure place for their family and for their money, Miami is cheaper than the rest of those big towns, and they're investing in Miami. Let's talk a little bit about the election and what's going on in the next few months here before the November election. Every year, Gallup, which is the national polling group that does everything from polling politics to polling, which soap you like better, they go out and they try to check with both Republicans and Democrats to see what kind of interest they have in the upcoming election. They used to ask you, do you plan to vote in November? And they found out that that's a very bad question because all of us say yes, because we don't want to seem like we're unpatriotic. Now what they ask is, have you been following, have you given some thought to the election as an indicator of whether or not there's any interest? And that number keeps going down. And the number that when they polled this in May, it was as low as it was in 2010, and it was as low as it was for Democrats as it was in 2010. So the difference was 37% of Republicans had given some thought, 24% of Democrats. That advantage mirrors the 2010 polling that they did. Now, you might remember in 2010 that there was a very strong year for Republicans. That was the beginning of the Tea Party movement. That was the midterm of President Obama's first term, and it created a sea change. The U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives flipped. I was in the Senate at the time. When I got there was 40 Republicans. We went to 45 after that. So right now, and again, there's still a lot of time between now and the election, the indications are that there's going to be low turnout, and there's going to be even lower turnout from Democrats than Republicans. The president's approval ratings continue to fall. By the way, that's not unusual for a midterm, second-term president. This is usually a tough time for the president. Think back to President Bush in 2006. His popularity was low, but President Obama's is falling to the lowest it's been during his time in office. Not much is going to change in the U.S. House of Representatives. There's 233 Republicans. There's 199 Democrats. And the seats are so gerrymandered in how they are drawn that there's very few of them that are competitive. You might have seen recently that a judge in Tallahassee threw out the map that was drawn by the Florida legislature, saying that at least 2 of those districts were not drawn fairly and properly in violation of Florida's Constitution. And the legislature is going to have to go back to the drawing board, not for this election, but for the next one, to redraw those seats. And that could impact the number of seats as they mess with the lines. So the House is not very competitive. Around the country, there's only going to be 12 to 24 really competitive races. And in Florida, there's really only one really competitive race, and that's the Garcia race in Miami. Joe Garcia beat David Rivera 2 years ago. His allegations to win that election was that David Rivera was corrupt because he messed with absentee ballots. In the meantime, Mr. Garcia's chief of staff is going to jail for the same thing. This is Miami for you. And we have a really strong challenger, a guy named Carlos Corbella, who is a school board member down there who looks like he's going to be the nominee. That is going to be a very hotly contested race. Both the Democrats and the Republicans will put millions of dollars in that race because it's a pickup seat. You've got some other races that have potentials to change hands. Up in Tallahassee in northern Florida, you have Sutherland versus Graham. That's Bob Graham's daughter. But in this being a likely Republican year, it's going to be hard for her to overcome that, so Sutherland probably wins. So long story short, the House is not going to change hands, most likely. I'd give you that. I'd say 90% certainty that Republicans will be in charge of the House when you wake up in November of 2014, later this year. The Senate's a different story. This year, there are a number of senators who won in 08. Remember, Senate terms are 6 years. So 08 was a big year for the president, for the Democratic Party. A lot of Democrats swept into office. And because of that, some of those Democrats are a little more vulnerable. And if you look around the races around the country, there is a chance that the Republicans will gain the seats they need. There's also a chance that it'll turn out being 50-50. And this will be my one trivia question for the day. Does anybody know what happens in the U.S. Senate when there's a 50-50 deadlock? Joe Biden gets a job. He will, our friend Joe will have something to do. He will get to break the tie in the U.S. Senate. You might remember Dick Cheney had to do that when he was first elected vice president. He would be around the world doing something. He'd have to fly him back to Washington to break the tie. But if that's the case and it's 50-50, the Democrats would still control the House and Harry Reid would still be the majority leader. But I think there's a good chance, I would say maybe a 60% chance that the Republicans take it back. Montana, South Dakota, and West Virginia are almost certain to go Republican. These are places where Democratic senators are retiring, and it's an open seat. And those are states that Mitt Romney won. And the climate's better for Republicans now than it was 2 years ago. So look for those three. That gets the Republicans to 58. Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Hampshire, those are all in play. I would say of those, Alaska and North Carolina have the best chance of going Republican. In Arkansas, you have Mark Pryor. Mark Pryor's family has been on the ballot in Arkansas probably since the end of the Civil War. I'm being a little facetious. There's a lot of Pryors, and he's well thought of, even though his party may not be very popular right now. Louisiana's Mary Landrieu. Her brother's the mayor of New Orleans. Her family is very strong in Louisiana. She's very tight with the oil and gas industry. She's a formidable person and a campaigner, so I think she probably holds on. New Hampshire is interesting. That's Scott Brown. You might remember him. He was the guy who won the special election for Ted Kennedy's Senate seat and became the 41st Republican, which theoretically would have stopped Obamacare, but not to get into the details of that. It was still passed anyway. But he's now running in New Hampshire. Hard to be a Republican in Massachusetts. New Hampshire is a Republican state, and there's another Republican U.S. Senator from New Hampshire, so he's got a chance to pick that up. So that would get you to 51 if you won those. There are some other states that there's a chance for Republicans to win in, but that would have to be a really big sweeping year. It would have to be like 2010 or 1994 or 1980 for Republicans for those states to go Republican over Democrat. So we'll see. Right now, I think they may do it, but it's going to be close. What's going to happen in Florida? The Florida electorate is pretty divided. 4,138,000 Republicans, 4.6 million Democrats. That number has gotten a little tighter between Democrats and Republicans in recent time. But the big story in Florida, like most places in the country, is that most folks now who are registering, especially if you're under the age of 30, you're registering non-party. And so we see that number growing the most. So those who are non-party are 2.6 million, and then minor parties, which you can kind of put in the same bag, is 344. So about 3 million non-party or minor party registrants. That number is going to grow. You're going to get to a point in this state in the next 5 years or so where it'll be one-third, one-third, one-third. So very close in terms of registration. What are the previous election results? Well, you know and you remember from 2000, Florida likes to have tie elections. So we have very, very close elections at the top of the ballot. This past election, Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney in Florida. Nobody thought that was going to happen except for Allison Tanton, who was the lady who ran the Obama campaign. I have a public policy institute that I work with at Palm Beach Atlantic. It's sort of my my volunteer effort, and I brought in Allison Tant and Brett Doster, who ran the Obama and Romney campaigns respectively. They had never been in the same room together, by the way, and they gave a talk for the students, and we found out sort of all of the really creative and amazing things that the Obama campaign did with technology. But even Democratic members of Congress from Florida that I were talking to right before the election did not think that President Obama would win Florida. He did. He eked it out by less than 100,000 votes. Rick Scott beat Alex Sink by 50,000 votes. Now you'll see there's a big difference in turnout. Look at those numbers for the presidential election, 4 million to 4 million, basically 8.5 million people vote. Governor's race, 2.6, 2.5, that's a substantial drop-off. That's because people don't turn out for these off-year elections in the same way that they do for the presidential. That usually favors Republicans. Big waves in presidential years for Democrats, big waves in gubernatorial years for Republicans. Other elections, I put up this Senate race because it was also a race where we had Charlie Crist in the race, so I think that's interesting. This is Rubio versus Meek versus Crist. You might remember at this time Crist was not yet a Democrat. He was a MPA, no party affiliation. And Marco Rubio handily won that race, but if you look at the number, if you put Meek and Crist together, there are more votes for them than there is for Rubio. So again, pretty tight. And then the presidential election should have been a horrible year for Republicans. Barack Obama ran the table, but still in Florida, the difference is only 250,000 votes. So we like to have very close and very tight elections in Florida. I'm not going to make you read this. This is a chart I did to show you that I did my homework because I want to give you some insight on who I think is going to win this election here in November. So what I did is I went back and I looked at every election in Florida at the top of the ticket from 1990 till today to see if there was something that we could glean from this. Is there a nugget? Is there a trend? Is there something that would reveal who's going to win this very close gubernatorial election here in November? And the only thing that you can really take from this, the real sort of thematic that you can glean from it, is that incumbents do incredibly well in Florida. If you look at all of these elections from 1990 to 2012, the incumbent, whether it was the president or it was the governor, has won. Even if the president, for example, lost the White House like George H.W. Bush did, he still won Florida that year, except for one, and that's the first one, 1990. That's when Lawton Chiles, former United States Senator, beat Bob Martinez, sitting governor of Florida. That's the last time that a sitting governor or top-of-the-ticket office holder has lost in Florida. Now, what was happening in 1990? Really bad recession. So it's not completely comparable to this election, but it does give us some insight. In this election, we have a very well-known challenger. Charlie Crist's ID number is equal to that of Rick Scott's. So that is equal to what happened in 1990. The difference is the economy now is doing really well. What does the polling say? Recent polling shows Scott edging ahead of Crist, but basically it's a tie election. This was not the case at the beginning of the year. In the beginning of the year, Crist was up by as much as 10 points. The difference has been is that Rick Scott's been on television since the spring, and when you spend millions of dollars on TV, it moves polling numbers. And if it doesn't move polling numbers, you need to hire new people, because that's why you spend millions of dollars on television. And they have been able to move the numbers. They're not only talking about Scott's accomplishments and trying to have Floridians credit Scott for the economy and its improvement, but they're also running negative ads against Charlie Crist in order to define him in a negative way before he can define himself. Scott's going to spend anywhere from $50 to $70 million on his side between all the different groups. We don't know how much Crist will have. It's probably in the range of 15 to 30. It's hard to know, and the reason why it's hard to know is because it's not just money in your campaign account, it's money at the Democratic Party of Florida, it's money in these outside groups, and as we'll talk about in a second, it's monies from third parties that aren't even coordinated with the campaign. Here's some interesting folks. Some would call it a rogues gallery. These are the folks who play nationally in politics and write millions of dollars of checks in order to influence elections. You have the Koch brothers on the left, you have Sheldon Adelson in the middle, and you have George Soros on the right. These are folks that can put $5, $10, $15 million into a campaign. You might remember that Sheldon Adelson gave Newt Gingrich $10 million during the presidential campaign, a group on the outside can say basically every single thing that a candidate can say except for vote. That's the only distinction. And this happened because the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Citizens United, struck down the election laws that regulated how much money could be contributed to an outside political advocacy group. They struck that down on First Amendment grounds. So these individuals have disproportionate influence, and we don't really know how much they'll play, and we don't know whether or not they'll set each other off. Will one side do 20 and the other side do 20? Will one side do twice as much? We just don't know. So the takeaways from this is incumbency really matters, and Scott is going to benefit from that incumbency. He's also going to benefit the fact that he's going to spend a lot more money than Charlie Crist. The improving economy certainly helps him. Now, if something happens between now and November, if there is a war in the Ukraine, if there's a war in Iraq, if some dislocation happens in the world economies, if there's some kind of market correction, all of those things seemingly would hurt Rick Scott because it would hurt the improvement of the Florida economy. Those are external events that you can't control for. But if things continue to go the way they're going, if you continue to read Florida Trends daily report about how great things are going in Florida, and you believe the news that the Florida economy is improving, that's going to redound to Scott's benefit. What are the factors in favor of Crist? Well, he's likable, he's a tremendous retail politician, he has 100% name ID, and he's raising money too. He's a little, I would say, lack of discipline in this approach to the governorship, but he's an excellent politician, so that could be part of his genius in all this. But we're going to see as we go along how well he does on the fundraising side. Intangibles. Medical marijuana is on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. Now, you may think that this is on the ballot because people care in a compassionate way about sick people and they're suffering through pain, and that we want to make sure that they have the availability to all resources possible to alleviate that pain. Or you may think that John Morgan, who runs his law firm, whose employee is Charlie Crist, is trying to turn out young people as Democrats to vote for Charlie Crist in the governor's race. I will let you choose whatever conclusion you like, but that is why, in my opinion, that's being done. I'm not sure it's going to turn many folks out. And the reason is, it's not full-scale marijuana use like Colorado did. Two, the Florida legislature, kind of smartly in a strategic move, passed a form of medical marijuana called Charlotte's Web, which is used to treat children who have an affliction, a seizure affliction, to kind of take the impetus out of trying to change the Constitution. So I don't know if it's going to turn a lot of people out. Frankly, most Republicans in the polling support it. In order for it to be an effective issue to turn people out, it has to be a deeply emotional issue. It has to be an issue that draws passion. That's what was done by Karl Rove in 2004 during George Bush's re-election campaign. They put on the ballot across the country same-sex marriage to draw out fundamental Christian groups to vote in the election who had not voted before. Will it do that for this? I don't think it's going to be that successful. It may draw some folks out, but like we talked about, this election may come down to 50,000 votes. So if 20,000 more people come out, that's significant. Another factor you should look for is there's a guy named Wiley, which I love the fact that a politician's last name is Wiley, who is a libertarian who is also running. And that libertarian is going to draw some of these young people who are voting and registering as a non-party affiliated voter. Wiley is a traditional libertarian, legalize drugs, don't fight foreign wars, leave me alone, government out of the boardroom, out of the bedroom. And he's going to have some support. He is not a crackpot. He's a legitimate candidate. And when you watch these debates, if you do, not very many people do, but if you're one of the folks that do, you're going to see Wiley on the stage. They are going to allow him to debate. He is going to get some votes. If he gets 3% of the vote, that could impact who wins this election. Who do those votes come from? Do they come from Charlie Crist or do they come from Rick Scott? I think they come disproportionately out of Crist. I think 2 out of 3 probably come out of Crist, because Crist's trying to appeal to that same group of young people. Those are intangibles that are hard to predict. So why does it matter? Well, for me, and I'm, disclaimer is I'm a Republican and I'm supporting Rick Scott, so take this for what it's worth. I think that if Rick continues to serve in office, there will be a continued focus on job creation, on making it easier for people to do business in the state, and that there'll be more tax cuts and more focus on ports and making Florida international gateway state. I think that will all be good for the quality of life in Florida, be strong for businesses, bring more customers to you in this state. What about Crist? Well, Crist now has adopted the Democratic positions, but more than that, he's really gone hard to the left. Now, I have folks ask me all the time, why is Charlie Crist running so far to the left when folks who are on the ballot, say U.S. senators who are Democrats, are running away from Obama? It doesn't make any sense. Why is Charlie Crist running to Obama when Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, for example, won't say the name Obama and won't appear with him and is running far away from him so that she can win her re-election? The reason why Charlie Crist is running hard left is because he knows that this is a base election. What does that mean? It means that people in the middle aren't going to vote. People who are undecided, people who don't vote that much, people who are non-party affiliated because they just picked that because they're not really interested in politics, they're going to stay home. There's going to be so much toxic television on that most people are going to be turned off, and whoever turns out their base the most is going to win. So Charlie Crist knows he has to appeal to the most Democratic part of the Democratic Party and get them enthused so that they show up to vote. That's why he's adopting that strategy. So that means if he's going to fulfill those kind of campaign promises, if he's elected, then he's going to end tax cuts, he's going to get the unions back in state politics, he will be against tort reform because he's getting strong support by the trial lawyers. He will oppose, in my view, energy companies, insurance companies, and privatization. He's got a history of doing that in the past, going after power companies on rate increases. He will prioritize environmentalism over business growth. And it'll have an impact on the 2016 presidential election because certainly Hillary Clinton, whoever the Democrat is, wants to win Florida, and having Charlie Crist here as governor, as a Democrat, would be helpful. Republican legislature is still going to stay Republican, but if you have a Democratic governor with a Republican legislature, and we've had this before with Lawton Chiles, then what does the Republican governor, or what does the Democratic governor do? Well, he appoints people. He uses that executive power. 4 Supreme Court justices are up in the next 4 years. If Charlie Crist is elected, he will have appointed all 7. Now, the interesting is he reported some as a conservative Republican, a moderate Republican, and then now as a liberal Democrat, so we'll still have a good diversity of ideology among them. But 4 vacancies at least to be filled by the next governor. Public Service Commission, which you all care about a lot. 3 of those folks are going to be replaced. Ed Balbus has already said that he's resigning and ending at the end of the year here. Lisa Edgar is up at the end of the 4-year term. Julie Brown's position is up now, and she's resubmitting. So what happens if Charlie Crist wins the election? Well, right now, that committee of folks is submitting the group of nominees, getting ready to go through that process to submit it to the governor. The governor can pick from those ones that they pick, Governor Scott. But if Charlie Crist is elected, he's the new governor, he can reject that pick. He has to do it within the 6 names that are, or more that are sent to him. He can't make the legislature go back and form a new committee and send a new list. But the election will impact who gets selected off those lists. So last slide, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. Who's going to win the election? I don't know, but it's going to be close. If the election were held today, Scott would win. But really the important thing is how much money does Charlie Crist have and how much will he spend between Labor Day and Election Day? He doesn't have to go step by step with Rick Scott. He doesn't have to go blow for blow with Rick Scott. If he has $25 million to spend, he can melt your television between Election Day, between Labor Day and Election Day, and that will make him pretty impactful. So if you want to watch one thing, watch how much money is reported that Crist has to spend after Labor Day. What kind of turnout are we going to have? Is it going to be 2012 and 2008 Obama-level turnout? No, it's never happened before. No Democrat has ever captured the presidential turnout in a non-presidential year. But all Charlie Crist has to do is turn up the dial a little bit and turn out more Democrats than normal, and he can win. Watch for Scott to really try to turn out his base, and you're going to see Scott spend more and more money to negatively define Charlie. And remember, at the end of the day, he spent $70 million of his own money to win the governorship the first time. And if he wants to write a big check in the last month, he can do that. I believe that the election will be close. Like all Florida elections, it'll be between 50,000 votes. So another nail biter in Florida, which will keep things interesting for us. Thank you so much for letting me present to you.